A strength a day, be your best every day. Hi, I'm Adimus, founder and director of Strength Optimizer. I aim to help you stay healthy, be happier, and deal with challenges with greater resilience. Have you ever wondered whether positive psychology coaching is right for you? What is positive psychology coaching anyway? And more importantly, how can positive psychology coaching benefit you? Today, you will meet Dr. Suzy Green, who will unpack for us how positive psychology coaching can help to improve our health and well-being. You will also learn about her new book, Positive Psychology Coaching in Practice. Thank you for watching. Good morning. My name is Adimus. I'm the founder and director of Strength Optimizer. Thank you for watching Strength Optimizers, the Size Up Your Wellbeing series. Today, we have Dr. Suzy Green joining us. Suzy is a coaching and clinical psychologist and founder and CEO of the Positive Institute. She is an honorary visitor professor at the University of East London and holds honorary academic positions at the Centre for Positive Psychology, the University of Melbourne, the Black Dog Institute, and she's also an affiliate with the Institute for Wellbeing at Cambridge University. Welcome, Suzy, and so great that you can join us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, Adimus. Thank you so much for asking me to speak with you today.
No worries, no worries. And thank you once again for taking your time to share with us your insight and wisdom in positive psychology coaching. And once again, congratulations for your co-author book with Stephen Palmer. And I believe that the book is called Positive Psychology Coaching in Practice, which we will cover a little bit more in today's interview.
Fantastic.
So Suzy, before we dive into the positive psychology coaching, maybe you can tell us what is the state of play of the coaching industry here in Australia and in overseas?
Oh, I think it's actually quite developed, and a large part of that, I would say, and I'm a little bit biased here, Animus, is thanks to the University of Sydney's Coaching Psychology Unit, which was established in the year 2000 and has really led the way globally in, I guess, the formalisation of the scientific field of coaching psychology, which underpins the practice of coaching. I guess coaching, as you may know, has varied backgrounds, I guess, largely coming out of sports coaching. A lot of people think about sports coaching when they think about coaching, or academic coaching. Sometimes people think about that. And look, it primarily came out of the US, and there's still a large proportion of coaching that occurs in the US. In fact, I wish here in Australia people would, engage coaches more actively like they do in the US. Yeah. But really what we've done here in Australia, as I said, is brought the scientific rigor to the psychological and adult learning principles that underpin coaching, particularly as a behavioural change mechanism, if you like. Yeah. And so the unit's been in existence for 20 years. We actually had our 20-year celebration in February this year. And, after it launched in the year 2000, it moved into the UK. And my colleague, Professor Stephen Palmer, played an incredible role in launching it in the UK, into Europe, down into South America, into South Africa, and it hasn't really made its way into the US yet, and that's something that I'm really passionate about seeing happen in coming years. But we have got a very strong scientific basis for the field of coaching psychology and what we might call evidence-based coaching, which is how we differentiate, I guess, coaching as usual. Yeah. Which again has emerged, as I mentioned before, out of sports coaching. The human potential movement, Tony Robbins type approaches, and not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with that. Really, what the field of coaching psychology has just brought a lot more rigor and sophistication. And of course, there's been professional bodies like the Australian Psychological Society has had a special interest group since about the year 2004. And we've hosted coaching psychology conferences at the University of Sydney. And then as it emerged into, particularly in the UK, the British Psychological Society also has a special interest group. And again, this rigor, along with published peer-reviewed journal articles and journals actually.
Yeah.
There's a number of those that are in existence, and again, that has really brought a lot of rigor to coaching.
Wow. And I guess that for the general public, perhaps not many people will associate coaching with something that is scientifically rigorous or evidence-based. And I guess that perhaps there's also one reason that there could be some myths and misconceptions about coaching. So maybe you can tell us what are some of the myths and misconceptions about coaching then, Suzy?
Yeah, really funny. Funny for me because they still exist, even though I think, we're 20 years on, it's, we've got a strong business case, a strong scientific rationale for it. There are still a lot of myths, and some of those relate to it being like, I guess, rah-rah performance, and sports with a sports focus around, purely focused on performance, whether that's sports or in the corporate sector. And in fact, when I first started executive coaching back in about 2004, I moved from a clinical practice as a clinical psych into executive coaching in the corporate. And you wouldn't dare mention well-being back in 2004.
Okay.
It was very hardcore performance, key performance indicators. The goals had to be about reaching the KPIs.
Yeah.
So there's still a leftover from that, and people thinking that it is purely performance, when in fact there's now what we call, and in fact there's been two key academics that have published in this area, one being Professor Anthony Grant, who we very sadly lost earlier this year, and the other one being Professor Reinhard Stelter out of the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. They've both published articles on what's known as third generation coaching. And from Tony's perspective, it's more about using the coaching approach, not just professional coaching or leader as coach, but really about how we develop coaching conversations, and I guess in terms of building a coaching culture. And then Professor Reinhard Stelter published a lot about coaching moving much more towards values and meaning. So again, when you're having conversations, whether it be in the corporate sector or in more a personal or life coaching conversation, you're really going much broader than performance. So it's much more about meaning and purpose. And I think the other potential myth is that, what is this? What is it? And particularly life coaching, which still seems to have a bit of a bad rap. And I've noticed that people are tending to use the term personal coaching or well-being coaching rather than life coaching, because I think one of the reasons why there has been so much controversy is that it's not regulated. The coaching industry is not regulated. There are a couple of professional bodies such as the International Coach Federation, the Association for Coaching, for example. But basically, Adamus, anyone can decide today that they want to be a life coach and put up a shingle and, start advertising. So there are grave concerns from the profession of psychology, and I've been one of those voices that have been raising those concerns for a long time. Because as you know, when you start talking about people's lives, you can open up a Pandora's box about issues that possibly are more within the realm of clinical or counselling psychology. Yeah. And you've got people in that field that have no mental health training in a large part, and haven't really have a grasp of some of those psychological underlying issues.
That's right. And it's sort of it's a good segue to my next questions, in the sense that we're talking about there are many kinds of coaching, and one of the more popular type of coaching is, as you mentioned, the life coaching. And I guess that how is evidence-based coaching or positive psychology coaching different from the life coaching? If I can use that life coaching.
Again, the term life coaching, from my perspective, was really utilised because there was still a large part, and there still is today, coaching, I would argue, is primarily done executive and leadership coaching. And that exists, and it's a very successful intervention, if you like, in the corporate sector. So life coaching sort of arose as a means to differentiate it from executive and leadership coaching, and that it could be for you to engage someone personally, not through the workplace, and to look at, I guess, either being your best self, from a personal growth perspective, or it could be about achieving a specific life goal that you have, like writing a book or running a marathon, or something like that. So it's sort of emerged, and it has been around for a long time. But I guess I personally have provided life coaching, if you like, or personal coaching in my practice as a coaching psychologist. So I would say that I don't really I actually, in fact, as I said before, I'd like to see more people have life or personal coaching. I really would, as a proactive means to life design, or to clarifying values, what matters most, and vision. What do I ideally want to do with my life while I'm here on the planet? But what differentiates, I guess, the type of life coaching that I might do, or my colleagues that have got, I guess, the rigorous education around behavioural change, psychological well-being, is that we're using an evidence base for the approach that we would take. Whereas I think someone that, as I said, just set a shingle up today and decided to be a life coach, sometimes they're just drawing on their own life experience. So you'll often see, and I also see this happening with health and fitness and weight loss, where somebody's had their own weight loss journey, and then suddenly they're an expert on helping everybody else to lose weight. So you might see people that are attracted, and I would say with good intent, like there's really good intent behind that. But my advice, and I've had, I say hundreds, maybe even thousands of people contact me over the last 20 years saying, I want to be a coach, how do I do this? And my advice has been, if this is something that you're really serious about and you want to do for the long term, and you want to really make an impact on people's lives, invest in some good quality education and training. That would be my advice.
Such a great advice, especially when you mentioned earlier, unfortunately, coaching by and large is still an unregulated profession. So therefore, it has to have some sort of benchmark or minimum standards, so that whoever who's engaging the coach, whether it's a business coach, executive coach, or even life coach, we know that they have met certain levels of competency. I guess that the big philosophy is that do no harms, and that's what we want to do. Be beneficial to the clients or people that we work with.
Exactly. And I think, from an ethical but also legal perspective, like if you are, if you are a part of a professional body, I mean, as a registered psychologist, my clients have legal recourse. If they're not happy with the service that I provide, there's a legal, pathway for them to take action, and I can be disbarred. But if somebody is a coach with operating without some sort of professional membership, then there's no legal recourse if there is harm done. So I think that's another consideration. And in saying that, as far as I'm aware, there have been no lawsuits when it comes to life coaching, and so that's really good. That's a good thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And again, I think generally most people are trying to do good, and so it's not as if they're out there trying to cause harm by any means. But again, if this is something that you are really serious about as a profession, then the best investment is in your own education and your own development as a human being, I would add too.
Yeah. And the other way I see it is that there's also this level of accountability, professional accountability and personal accountability as well. Therefore, having the ability to meet some minimum level of competency or belong to some sort of professional regulations, not only that we'll be able to build our level of competency, but the accountability actually provide assurance and confidence to everyone who's involved in their professions, and advance the profession together as well.
Absolutely. And if we do want the field to be taken seriously and to move towards professionalisation, I guess there's been lots of arguments around it's not really a profession yet. But if we do, then I think collectively as a group, then we need to continue to have these conversations around these topics.
Wonderful. Maybe you can tell us, Suzy, a little bit more in terms of in general, how can people or organizations benefit from coaching?
Yeah, well, again, I guess I can talk from the science, because there is significant amounts of research now. There's been, I think, at least 2 or 3 meta-analyses on the beneficial impact of coaching, evidence-based coaching, particularly from a cognitive behavioural solution-focused approach to coaching. There are various approaches. There are psychodynamic approaches, narrative approaches, but most of the research, which has included my own research, has been on a cognitive behavioural solution focused approach to coaching. So we know that it not only increases people's goal attainment, so you're more likely to achieve your goals if you engage in an evidence-based coaching intervention, but my research and others have also shown that there is associated well-being impacts or outcomes of that as well. So, and in fact, most people would come for coaching. Personal coaching, life coaching is generally around wanting to be happier, wanting, to increase their psychological well-being. And increasingly in the corporate sector, we're being given permission, whereas I said before, you wouldn't dare talk about well-being. We actually now have leaders saying we want coaching, in the words of one of our current clients, to help our people be better human beings. Now, I've never heard that, in the years before in the corporate sector. So we're being given permission to actually focus in on well-being. And then I guess I can also speak as a practitioner, having worked with hundreds of people. I'm not really doing much individual work now because I'm running the business and I've got associates that do the individual work. But again, I think the beauty of having sat with, and it is literally like hundreds of people, when you've sat with them, as you would know in your career as a counsellor too, I think it's sort of, to me, it gives you a certain degree of, certainty, or that I can actually say that I have sat with people through this process, and overwhelmingly people benefit from it. I haven't really seen anyone that hasn't. Now, it's not to say that it's always a joyful experience, because when you're looking at your values and what matters most, sometimes there's a realization that you're not living a values congruent life, an authentic life. And there can be a lot of discomfort about that recognition. There can be a lot of discomfort in creating a life that is values congruent, because often that means, disturbing people around you that like you in a certain way as well. And it takes a lot of courage to go on that pathway of transformational, what we might call developmental or transformational change. So I think, definitely the benefits, or as I said, I can speak from the science, but also the practice, that there's real benefit. And I personally have had 3 coaches in my life so far, each at a really important turning point for me. So one was actually completing my thesis, and I was the first person in my group to submit my thesis, arguably the least stressed. And then I had another coach help me make a transition from my clinical practice, which was down the south coast of Sydney, to a clinical and coaching practice up in Sydney. So that was a huge transition for me. And then finally, a couple of years ago, I engaged a business coach from New York, which is another, I guess, beauty of coaching, is that it can be done virtually. It was more mentor coaching in that sense, because he had an MBA as well, and I really needed someone with a business background but took a coaching approach to help me build a business. So I can say from personal experience that it's been really, really helpful in my own personal and professional career also.
It sounds like earlier we were talking about how we can move the coaching industry from an unregulated to a more regulated one, and I guess another criteria is that if you do want to be so-called successful coach or an effective coach, then we ourselves also need a coach as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think, having that experience, and that's why when I was doing my doctorate, I thought my research was on coaching and I'd never had a coach. So I thought, I want to have that experience of it. So again, and I did my homework clearly, because I knew I was learning a lot about the field at the time. So I engaged a coach that had a master's in was coaching psychology, was one of the first people to go through the coaching masters at Sydney Uni. He was also a psychologist, and he also had a business. So it was a really helpful for me at the time to do my homework. And I think that is one of my recommendations when people are looking for coaches, is to ask the questions like, what education have you done? What experience do you have? Any past clients that would be willing to chat to me about their experience, or so do your homework before you willy-nilly engage a coach.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, I guess that when you go through any of the search engine, there's no shortages of all the different type of coaches that pop out into your screen.
Absolutely.
Do your homework. Very well said. Well said. And again, earlier on, I mentioned that you have recently released a book and with Professor Simon Palmer, and it's called The Positive Psychology Coaching in Practice.
Yes.
So please, tell us more about this book of yours and with Professor Simon Palmer.
Well, I think it came about because, most of my presentations and publications in the last 20 years have been about integrating positive psychology with coaching psychology. So when I was teaching at Sydney Uni for 10 years in the coaching psychology unit, my subject that I wrote and delivered was called Applied Positive Psychology. So how do we use the science of positive psychology in an evidence-based coaching context? And so I was really, I guess, pioneering in many ways in those days, because even within positive psychology, it was still very early days. No one was really talking much about coaching or coaching psychology. And coaching psychology was really emerging at the same time as positive psychology. So I've had this interest for 20 years as to how do they work together, and for many years now, I've called them best friends, that they need to be hand in hand working together. And then I came across Robert Biswas-Diener's book on positive psychology coaching and practicing positive psychology coaching, which I thought were brilliant in as much as they gave some great insights into the science, but also some practical strategies for coaches that were out there in the field to be able to draw on some of the science of positive psych. And of course, Robert's moved on, and having had some conversations with him over the last year or so, he's moved on a little bit from some of his early ideas in those books, but I would still recommend them as must-reads in this area. But what I realised was that there wasn't an academic text. So there wasn't an academic text on positive psychology coaching. So Stephen and I put our heads together and thought, let's do an edited book, and let's ask some of the, I guess, practitioners that have an academic connection. So we really were looking either for, if it was co-authored, we wanted an academic that knew their stuff, but we'd also want a practitioner that knew what it was like to actually put that into practice. And in some cases, we were lucky enough to get scientist practitioners. So, for example, one of the chapters is on mindfulness in coaching, and we were lucky to have Dr. Gordon Spence, who's a close colleague of mine from the University of Wollongong. And Gordon is an academic and a practitioner, and so he knew the science really well. So each of the chapters has an introduction to the science to start with, and then it looks at how do you apply this in an evidence-based coaching context. So it really is aimed for the practitioner that wants to draw on the science and get some very evidence-based tips about what that looks like in practice.
Excellent. Sounds like a very rigorous, not only as an academic textbook, but lots of evidence-based strategies where the practitioner can actually leverage and utilize in their practices as well.
Yes, absolutely. And there are various topics. I'm trying to think now off the top of my head because I haven't looked at the book for a little while, but I mentioned mindfulness. There's a chapter on ACT in there, acceptance and commitment training. So, I mean, some of these topics stand alone. Mindfulness stands alone, although we sort of, co-opted under the positive psychology banner, and same with ACT. It's very aligned to positive psych, but so there's certainly ways that you can introduce them in an evidence-based coaching context. So there's lots of different chapters on different aspects of positive psychology, positive leadership, for example, and how you'd use that in an evidence-based coaching context as well. Strengths is another chapter. They're all coming back now.
Yes.
So,
one of my favorite strengths. Yes.
Exactly.
Wonderful. So at the more personal level, Suzy, what is one thing that you have discovered about yourself while writing about this book?
That there's still so much to learn, actually. So when I first started teaching at Sydney Uni, it was 2004. So if you think about the timeline for positive psych, Seligman launched it in his presidential speech in 1998, right? Then 2000 was when it was sort of formalized. So I'm teaching in 2004. I used to be able to, and actually I had this conversation with Professor Michael Steger a little while back as well. We were both reminiscing about how we used to be able to quote all of the research in 2004. Like you could quote them. There was only probably 12 studies, Yeah. So I used to know all of the research. And when you're teaching it, particularly to postgraduate students, I felt a lot of anxiety, to be honest, about making sure that I really knew the research and that I was imparting the best knowledge, because the students, have invested a lot of time and money in doing a master's, as you know. So I used to be able to quote all the research. And then, as time went by, 2006, 8, 10, I remember one day just thinking to myself, there's no way you can know every study. There's no way.
Can't memorize all of them anymore.
And I had to accept it and let it go. And look, to be honest, even now, I know a lot of stuff that falls under the umbrella of positive psych, but I don't, because of time, have the opportunity to go deep in some of those different areas. Unless, like last week, I gave a wonderful presentation in a corporate setting to a group of women, and they asked me to present on the science of courage and bravery. So I thought, well, I know a bit about that, and primarily I do from the VIA, but I spent a week doing a literature review, reading probably 10 to 15 articles, pulling out books out of my library, and now I know a lot about courage and bravery. I can tell you a lot about it. But I guess, personally, this is the beauty of engaging in, I guess, the continued academic writing that I want to do. And I did mention, and I'll mention, that we also have another new book coming out with Springer next year called Positive Psychology Coaching in the Workplace. And I'm in the process with my co-editors, Wendy Smith and Alona Bonnywell, of editing these chapters right now. And I mentioned before we came on today, there's a chapter on cross-cultural applications of positive psych coaching. Just inspiring, and I'm learning so much in just editing these texts, and then I go down a rabbit hole because I think, I haven't heard about that study. And that's what happens when you have curiosity and lots of learning as two of your top strengths as well. So I think, it's realizing that as much as I know a lot, there's just so much more to learn.
Yeah. And that's why it's always such a joy, to have a chat with you, Suzy, because as you say, the beginning introduction that I talk about you is just one snapshot in terms of your impressive CV, but and you're always there, willing to share your expertise, willing to learn, and willing to admit that, hey, yes, I do know a large chunk, but there's so much more that I can continue to learn, and that's such a wonderful, beautiful quality of yours, Suzy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I guess that just one last question for you, Suzy. Okay, so what is one thing that you have been doing this week to look after your own well-being?
Yes. Well, I've just been this morning for a walk. I'm very fortunate. I live in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and for anyone that's been there will know that it's a very busy part of Sydney near Bondi Beach, and even with COVID, it's still been really busy. But I live in an area up the hill from Bondi, and there's this incredible park that I actually lived in this area for 5 years before I stumbled. I didn't even know it existed. And it's like a rainforest in the middle, like less than 15 minutes from the city, this incredible rainforest park. So I've been there this morning walking, doing some Shinrin-yoku, I think the Japanese call it.
Forest bathing?
Yeah, so I've been doing that this morning. So getting my green exercise, and doing some forest bathing. And it, as the research is now continuing to grow and support what we already intuitively feel, that nature is just good for the soul, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a big fan of the nature as well.
Absolutely.
That's good. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, Suzy. And of course, for those of you who are watching and listening, if you do want to engage Suzy's expertise in helping to create a meaningful and sustainable changes either in workplaces, school, or even your own life, make sure you visit her website at thepositiveinstitute.com.au. That is the Positive Institute, one word.com.au. And of course, make sure you also watch up Suzy's new book in 2021 called Positive Psychology Coaching in Workplace.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for watching. I'm Adimus from Strength Optimizers. We are here to bring out the best in you through optimizing your strengths. Have an awesome day, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, Adimus.
Thank you, Suzy.